When the cursed Omega's touch withered every living thing around her, the pack cast her out to die alone in the wilderness, until the Alpha King discovered that her deadly gift was exactly what he needed to save his realm from shadow wraiths that devoured life itself. Now, as ancient enemies rise and her curse transforms into the kingdom's salvation, will Lyra embrace the darkness within her, or let it consume everything she's finally found worth protecting? Blood dripped from Lyra's knees as she stumbled through the thorny bushes, each step taking her farther from the only home she'd ever known. The pack's angry howls still echoed in her ears, growing quieter, but never truly fading. She pressed her hand against a tree trunk to steady herself, and watched in horror as the bark turned black under her palm. "Not again," she whispered, pulling her hand away quickly. But the damage was already done. Dark veins spread across the oak tree like poison, and within seconds, its leaves began to curl and die. This was why they threw her out. This was why her own mother had looked at her with fear instead of love. Every living thing Lyra touched simply died. She had lived her whole life being careful. So careful. Wearing gloves even in summer heat. Sleeping alone while other Omega girls shared warm beds with sisters. Eating last so no one would accidentally brush against her during meals. But on her 18th birthday, when every shifter was supposed to experience their first change into wolf form, everything went wrong. The transformation should have been beautiful. Other pack members always described it as feeling like coming home to themselves. But when Lyra shifted, every flower within 50 feet turned to ash. The grass beneath her paws cracked and died. Even the insects fell from the sky, like tiny, silent raindrops. The pack elders called an emergency meeting that very night. They whispered words like cursed and dangerous and cannot be allowed to spread. Her mother cried, but she didn't argue when they voted to banish Lyra forever. Now, 3 days later, Lyra had nothing left but the ragged dress on her back and the constant ache of hunger in her belly. She hadn't eaten since leaving the packlands. Every time she tried to hunt, her curse killed whatever small animals came too close. Even the stream water seemed to taste bitter after she cupped it in her hands. The forest grew darker as evening approached. Lyra found a small cave hidden behind a waterfall and curled up inside, shivering from cold and loneliness. She could hear her wolf whimpering inside her mind, confused and scared. Even her own animal spirit seemed broken by whatever evil lived inside her. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by heavy rain. Lyra pulled her knees to her chest and tried to remember her grandmother's lullabies. But all she could think about were the pack elders' cruel words. Some Omegas are born wrong. Some carry darkness instead of light. Maybe they were right. Maybe she really was just a mistake that nature had made. Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it made the cave walls shake. But underneath the storm noise, Lyra heard something else. Footsteps. Heavy boots, splashing through puddles, coming closer to her hiding place. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Wild animals didn't wear boots. That meant shifters had found her. Maybe hunters from her old pack, coming to make sure she never returned. Or worse, rogues who might hurt a helpless Omega traveling alone. Lyra pressed herself deeper into the cave shadows and held her breath. The footsteps stopped right outside the waterfall. Through the rushing water, she could see the outline of a tall figure, waiting, listening. "I know you're in there," called a deep voice that seemed to make the very air vibrate with power. "Come out. I won't hurt you." Lyra's wolf suddenly perked up with interest, which made no sense at all. Her animal spirit had been sad and quiet for days, but now it was practically dancing with excitement. What could possibly make her wolf react that way to a stranger's voice? "I can smell your fear," the voice continued, gentler now. "And something else. Something unusual." That word, unusual, made Lyra's stomach flip. People had called her many things over the years. Cursed, dangerous, wrong, but never unusual. Like maybe her strangeness could be something other than evil. Against every smart instinct screaming in her head, Lyra found herself crawling toward the cave entrance. She peeked through the waterfall and gasped. The man standing in the rain was the most beautiful and terrifying person she had ever seen. Tall as a tree, with midnight black hair that hung to his shoulders and eyes like storm clouds. Power rolled off him in waves that made her skin tingle. But what made her wolf practically purr with recognition was the scent that drifted through the rain-soaked air. Alpha. Not just any alpha, but one so strong and pure that every instinct in her body wanted to submit and trust and follow. "There you are," he said softly and smiled. "I've been looking for you for a very long time." The alpha's words hit Lyra like a physical blow, making her stumble backward into the cave wall. Looking for her? That was impossible. Nobody looked for cursed omegas, they only ran away from them. "You're making a mistake," she called through the waterfall, keeping her distance. "I'm not who you think I am. I'm dangerous. Everything I touch dies." Instead of backing away like any reasonable person would, the stranger stepped closer to the cave entrance. Rain plastered his dark hair against his face, but his storm-gray eyes never left hers. "Show me." "What?" Lyra's voice cracked with confusion. "Show me this curse of yours." He held out his hand, palm up. "Touch me." Lyra shook her head so hard her wet hair whipped across her face. "No, I won't hurt you. I've hurt enough people already." "My name is Kieran," he said, still holding his hand steady despite the cold rain. "I'm the Alpha King of the Northern Territory, and I'm not afraid of your curse." Alpha King. The words hit Lyra like another thunderclap. She had heard stories about him, whispered around packfires on winter nights. They said he was the strongest alpha born in 300 years, that he could command any shifter with just his voice, that he had never been defeated in battle. But they also said he was looking for something, or someone. "The prophecy," Lyra breathed, remembering fragments of old stories. "The seers said you were searching for, but that can't be me. I'm nobody special." Kieran's smile was sad and knowing. "Come out of the cave, Lyra. Let me see you properly." She jerked backward. "How do you know my name? I never told you. Your grandmother was Elena Moonwhisper. Your mother is Sarah of the Silver Creek Pack. You were born during the lunar eclipse 18 years ago, when the moon turned red as blood." Kieran took another step closer, water dripping from his clothes, but his voice steady and sure. "The night you were born, every seer in the kingdom had the same vision. A child touched by void magic, who would either save us all or destroy everything." Lyra's legs gave out, sending her crashing to the cave floor. Void magic. She had never heard those words before, but something deep inside her wolf spirit recognized them, responded to them. "I don't understand," she whispered. 3 days ago, shadow creatures attacked our northern border. They drain the life from everything they touch, leaving nothing but empty husks behind. Our best warriors can't fight them. Our healers can't cure their victims. And they're moving south toward the capital, where 50,000 innocent people live. Kieran crouched down outside the waterfall, bringing himself to her eye level. Dark magic can only be fought with dark magic. Death can only be conquered by death. You're not cursed, Lyra. You're the answer we've been praying for. The words should have made her feel hopeful, but instead they filled her with terror. You want to use me as a weapon. I want you to choose your own destiny. His voice was rough with emotion. The pact that threw you out saw only destruction in your power. I see protection. I see salvation. I see an Omega strong enough to stand beside an Alpha and face down the darkness together. When was the last time anyone had wanted to do anything together with her? Lyra found herself leaning toward the cave entrance, drawn by something she couldn't name. What if I can't control it? What if I make everything worse? Then we'll face that together too. Kieran slowly reached through the waterfall, his hand still extended in invitation. But first, you have to trust me enough to try. Lyra stared at his hand, strong, scarred from battles, steady despite the freezing rain. Her curse would probably kill him the moment their skin touched. Any smart person would run away. Any kind person would refuse to hurt him. But her wolf was practically clawing at her insides, desperate to touch this alpha who smelled like home and safety and belonging. And somewhere deep in her chest, a tiny voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, she was tired of being afraid. "If I hurt you," she said quietly, "I'll never forgive myself." "If you don't try," Kieran replied, "thousands of innocent people will die, including you, when the shadow creatures find you here, alone and defenseless." That decided it. Lyra had spent her whole life being selfish, staying away from others to keep them safe. But if people were going to die anyway, maybe it was time to be brave instead. She crawled forward on hands and knees until she reached the waterfall. Her heart hammered so loud she was sure Kieran could hear it. Slowly, carefully, she extended her shaking hand toward his. The moment their skin touched, the world exploded into light and sensation and power that made her scream. But instead of death spreading from their joined hands, something incredible happened. Kieran's alpha strength flowed into her curse and transformed it, turning decay into something that hummed with protective energy. When the light faded, they were both still alive, still whole, and somehow fundamentally changed. "Well," Kieran said, his voice slightly breathless as he helped pull her out of the cave and into the storm, "that's not exactly what I expected to happen." The massive oak doors slammed shut behind them with a sound like thunder. Lyra's bare feet stumbled on smooth marble floors that had never known dirt or blood. Crystal chandeliers hung above her head like frozen stars, and she pressed herself against the cold stone wall, leaving black handprints wherever she touched. "This is a mistake," she whispered, watching servants scatter like frightened mice when they saw her ragged dress and wild hair. "I don't belong here." But Kieran moved through his palace like he owned the very air itself. His boots clicked against the floor in a steady rhythm that made her heart race. "You belong wherever I say you belong," he said without looking back. "Follow me." The hallway stretched forever, lined with paintings of stern-faced royals, whose eyes seemed to track her movement. Their disapproval felt heavy as stones on her shoulders. Whispers followed in their wake. "Cursed," "Deathbringer," "Abomination," each word cut deeper than the last. "Your Majesty," a woman's voice called out sharp as breaking glass. "What is the meaning of this?" A tall lady swept toward them, her silver hair pulled back tight enough to stretch her skin. Her blue dress cost more than Lyra's entire pack had owned. Everything about her screamed wealth and power and disgust. "Lady Helena." Kieran's voice went flat as winter. "Meet Lyra. She'll be staying with us." The woman's pale eyes looked Lyra up and down, like she was examining a bug. "That thing cannot remain in the palace. Look what she's done to the walls." Lyra glanced back at her trail of black handprints and wanted to disappear. The curse mark on her shoulder burned like fire under her thin dress. She started to step away, ready to run back to the forest where she belonged. "She stays," Kieran repeated, but his tone could have frozen rivers. "Unless you're questioning my authority?" Lady Helena's face turned red as apples. "Of course not, Your Majesty. But the other nobles, the staff, they won't stand for this. Then they can leave." He turned to Lyra, his gray eyes softer now. "Come, there's something you need to see." They climbed a spiral staircase that seemed to wind up forever. Lyra's legs shook with each step, but she followed him higher and higher until they reached a door covered in strange silver marks. "These symbols keep dark magic out," Kieran explained, touching one gently. "My grandmother carved them herself before she died. She was the last person who understood void magic." He pushed open the door to reveal a room filled with books, maps, and glass bottles filled with swirling shadows. Ancient weapons hung on the walls, their blades dark as midnight. In the center sat a crystal ball that pulsed with inner light. "This was her study," he said quietly. "She spent 50 years learning about curses like yours." Lyra stepped inside, and immediately the shadows in the bottles began to dance faster. The crystal ball's light grew brighter. Books fell open on their own, pages flipping to pictures of people whose hands glowed with the same black light as hers. "I'm not the only one," she breathed, staring at a drawing of a woman surrounded by withered flowers. "You're part of an ancient bloodline." Kieran moved to a shelf and pulled down a leather journal. "Every few generations, one is born with the power to absorb dark magic. Your people called it a curse because they didn't understand." He opened the journal to a page covered in his grandmother's careful handwriting. Lyra couldn't read the words, but she recognized the drawings. Shadow creatures with burning red eyes. Maps showing dark spots spreading across the land like poison. "The shadow wraiths came before, 200 years ago," Kieran continued. "They killed thousands before my ancestor found a void-touched Omega willing to help. Together, they drove the shadows back to their realm." "What happened to her?" Lyra asked. Though she already feared the answer, she survived, had children, lived a long life surrounded by people who loved her. His finger traced a small drawing at the bottom of the page. A woman and man, standing together, both marked with crown symbols. She became queen. The words hit Lyra like lightning. Her knees went weak, and she grabbed the edge of a table to keep from falling. "That's impossible. I'm nobody. I'm cursed." "You're powerful." He closed the journal and set it carefully on the table. "The shadow wraiths can feel your presence, even from their realm. That's why they're gathering now. They know you exist, and they want to destroy you before you learn to control your gifts." A cold wind rattled the windows, though the day had been still before. In the distance, a wolf howled, not in greeting, but in warning. Kieran's head snapped up, his nostrils flaring as he caught a scent that made him growl low in his throat. "They're here," he said, moving toward the weapons on the wall, sooner than expected. "Who's here?" But even as she asked, Lyra felt it, a pulling sensation in her chest, like something calling to her from far away. The curse mark on her shoulder began to burn again, hotter than before. "My uncle's men?" Kieran pulled down a sword that hummed with power. "He's been trying to take the throne since my father died. With the shadow wraiths rising, he'll use the fear to turn the pack against me." Heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs. Angry voices echoed through the halls below. Lady Helena's shrill tones rose above the rest. "She's corrupted him! The cursed Omega has bewitched our king!" Kieran grabbed Lyra's hand, his warm fingers wrapping around her cold ones. "Trust me?" Before she could answer, the door burst open. 6 wolves in human form filled the doorway, their eyes glowing with inner fire and their faces twisted with rage. Behind them stood a man who looked almost exactly like Kieran, but older and scarred, with silver streaking his dark hair and cruelty carved into every line of his face. "Uncle Theron." Kieran's voice stayed calm, but Lyra could feel tension rolling off him like heat from a fire. "You're not welcome here. I go where the pack's safety demands." Theron stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Lyra, like she was a snake ready to strike. "This abomination threatens everything we've built. Look around you, nephew. See what her curse has already done." Lyra followed his pointing finger and gasped. The ancient books lay crumbling on their shelves, their pages turning to dust. The crystal ball had gone dark. Even the silver symbols on the door were tarnishing black. "It's not intentional." Kieran moved to stand between her and the others. "She can't control it yet." "Exactly my point." Theron's smile showed too many teeth. "An uncontrolled void-touched Omega will kill us all. The smart choice is to end this now, before she destroys the entire pack." The largest of his men stepped forward, muscles bulging under his shirt and claws extending from his fingertips. "Let us handle this, Prince Theron. One quick snap of the neck, and the danger ends." Terror froze Lyra's blood. These weren't just angry pack members. They were here to kill her. She backed against the window, feeling the glass cold against her shoulders, while her curse mark burned like a brand. "You'll have to go through me first." Kieran raised his sword, the blade gleaming in the lamplight. "If necessary." Theron drew his own weapon, longer and heavier than his nephew's. "I've already lost one brother to void magic. I won't lose the pack to it as well. My father died fighting shadow wraiths, Kieran snarled, his human form flickering as his wolf pressed close to the surface. Not from void magic. Your father died because he trusted a cursed Omega. Theron's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more threat than shouting. Just like you're doing now. The two men circled each other while their followers spread out around the room. Lyra pressed herself smaller against the window, wishing she could disappear entirely. Every few seconds, one of Theron's wolves would glance her way, with hunger in their eyes. Stand down, uncle, Kieran commanded, putting all his alpha authority into the words. I am your king. You're a foolish boy playing with forces beyond his understanding. Theron lunged forward, his sword singing through the air. The clash of metal on metal rang out like a bell. Both men moved faster than normal humans could follow, their blades weaving patterns of attack and defense while they tested each other's skills. Kieran was younger and quicker, but Theron had experience and brutal cunning. Around them, the other wolves began to shift, their human forms rippling and changing. Bone popped and cracked as they took their animal shapes. Massive creatures with fur like storm clouds and teeth like daggers. They formed a circle around the fighting men, cutting off any escape. Please stop, Lyra whispered, but her words were lost in the sounds of battle. That's when she noticed something strange happening to the room itself. Where the wolves' paws touched the floor, the marble began to crack. Where their breath fogged the air, frost formed on the walls. The temperature was dropping fast, and shadows gathered in the corners despite the bright lamplight. Something's wrong, she called out, louder this time. Look around you. But the fighters were too focused on their battle to listen. Kieran had gained the upper hand, driving Theron back toward the bookshelves, when one of the wolves suddenly howled in pain. Its gray fur was turning white at the tips, as if ice was spreading through its body. Then Lyra saw them, thin wisps of darkness, seeping under the door and through the window cracks. They moved like living smoke, reaching out with finger-like tendrils that froze whatever they touched. The temperature plummeted until everyone's breath came out in visible puffs. Shadow wraiths, she breathed, understanding flooding through her. They followed the conflict. They feed on anger and violence. The largest wolf tried to snap at one of the dark tendrils and collapsed instantly, its eyes going blank as the life drained from its body. In seconds, it was nothing but skin and bones, its spirit consumed entirely. Everybody out! Kieran shouted, abandoning his fight with Theron to grab weapons from the wall. Now, but the wraiths had surrounded the doorway, their forms growing more solid as they fed on the pack's terror. Escape was impossible. The windows were too high to jump from, and the creatures were everywhere now, filling the room with deadly cold. Theron raised his sword against one of the wraiths, but the blade passed right through its smoky body. The creature laughed, a sound like winter wind through empty trees, and reached out toward him with fingers made of concentrated darkness. Weapons don't work, Lyra found herself speaking without thinking. You can't fight them with claws or steel. Then how do we stop them? Kieran demanded, backing toward her as more wraiths poured through the walls themselves. Lyra looked at the curse mark on her shoulder, now glowing bright as a star. The shadows seemed drawn to its light, but also afraid of it. They circled around her but wouldn't come too close, like moths around a flame that could burn them. I don't know, she admitted, but I think they're here because of me. The truth hit everyone at the same time. Theron's eyes went wide with understanding and fury. His remaining wolves whimpered and pressed themselves against the far wall. Even Kieran took a step back, though he kept his sword raised. You led them right to us, Theron accused, his voice shaking with rage and fear. The cursed Omega brought death to our very home. As if responding to his words, the largest wraith turned toward Lyra and smiled with too many teeth. When it spoke, its voice sounded like her own, but twisted and cold. Come home, little sister, it whispered, extending a hand wreathed in starlight and shadow. Stop fighting what you are. The silver chains burned against Lyra's wrists as 3 royal guards dragged her through the castle's lower tunnels. Please, she whispered, but her voice echoed off cold stone walls that didn't care about her fear. The head guard, a massive man named Commander Steele, kept looking back at her with eyes full of disgust. "You shouldn't have touched the prince's armor," Steele growled. "Now it's black as midnight and useless in battle." Lyra wanted to explain that she hadn't meant to ruin anything. She'd only been trying to polish the metal like the other servants, but everywhere her fingers went, darkness followed. The beautiful silver had turned to something that looked like it belonged in a nightmare. They threw her into a cell that smelled like old water and rats. The metal bars felt ice cold when she wrapped her hands around them. Above her head, she could hear the sounds of the castle preparing for war. Boots stomping, swords clashing, people shouting orders. "The shadow creatures will attack tomorrow," Steele said through the bars. "And thanks to you, our best weapons are ruined." He walked away, leaving her alone in the dark. But Lyra wasn't completely alone. Something moved in the shadows of her cell, something that whispered her name like an old friend. She pressed herself against the back wall, her heart beating so fast it hurt. "Don't be afraid," the voice said. It sounded like her mother, but her mother had been dead for 10 years. "We've been waiting for you." A shape stepped out of the darkness. It looked like a woman made of starlight and smoke, beautiful and terrible at the same time. Her eyes were black holes that seemed to swallow light itself. "I am the Shadow Queen," the creature said, floating closer. "And you, dear child, are my daughter." "That's impossible," Lyra said. But even as the words left her mouth, she felt something inside her chest respond to the Queen's presence. Something dark and hungry that she'd always tried to hide. "Your human mother carried you." "Yes, but I gave you life. I gave you power." The Shadow Queen reached through the metal bars like they were made of air. "Every flower you've killed, every weapon you've ruined, every person who's feared you, it was all leading to this moment." Lyra backed away until she couldn't go any further. "I don't want your power. It only hurts people." "Silly girl. Power doesn't hurt people. People hurt people. Your power could save this kingdom or destroy it. The choice is yours." The Queen's voice became softer, more caring. "But first, you need to understand what you really are." The Shadow Queen waved her hand, and suddenly Lyra could see through the castle walls like they were made of glass. She saw Kieran in his room, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. He kept looking toward the dungeons where she was trapped. "He cares about you," the Queen said. "But caring isn't enough. He needs you to be strong. He needs you to embrace what you are." "What am I?" Lyra asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "You are a bridge between life and death, between hope and fear, between salvation and destruction." The Queen's form started to fade. "Tomorrow, when the shadow creatures come, you'll have to choose. Will you be the weapon that destroys them, or will you let fear destroy everything you love?" Before Lyra could ask more questions, the Shadow Queen was gone. But her words hung in the air like smoke, and Lyra knew that nothing would ever be the same. Hours passed. The castle grew quiet above her head. Then she heard footsteps in the tunnel, lighter than the guards' heavy boots. A figure appeared at her cell door, and her heart jumped when she saw who it was. "Kieran?" she whispered. The Alpha King stood outside her cell, holding a key in his hand. His eyes were red like he'd been crying, but his jaw was set with determination. "I'm getting you out of here," he said, unlocking the door. "But your people, my people are wrong." He helped her stand up, his hands gentle despite his strength. "I've been thinking about what you said, about being cursed, and I think you're looking at it backwards." They walked together through the tunnels, their footsteps echoing in the darkness. Lyra kept expecting guards to stop them, but the hallways were empty. "What do you mean?" she asked. "A curse is just a gift that people don't understand yet," Kieran said. "My grandmother told me stories about Omegas who could control death itself. They weren't evil. They were guardians, protectors who could face the darkness so others didn't have to." They reached a door that led outside. Through the keyhole, Lyra could see the first light of dawn, painting the sky purple and gold. It was beautiful, but it also meant that time was running out. "The shadow creatures will come with the sunrise," Kieran said. "And when they do, I want you by my side. Not as my prisoner, not as my weapon, but as my partner." He opened the door, and fresh air rushed in. Lyra took a deep breath, tasting freedom and possibility and fear all mixed together. "What if I can't control it?" she asked. "What if I make everything worse?" Kieran took her hands in his. Where their skin touched, she felt warmth instead of the cold emptiness that usually followed her touch. "Then we'll face it together," he said. "Because that's what mates do. They don't run from the darkness. They transform it into light." The shadow creatures came like a black wave across the morning sky, blocking out the sun and turning day into night. Lyra stood on the castle walls next to Kieran, watching an army of nightmares pour over the distant hills. They moved like liquid darkness, swallowing everything in their path. "There are so many," she breathed, her knuckles white as she gripped the stone wall. Below them, the royal guards were setting up defenses that Lyra knew wouldn't work. Swords and shields and armor meant nothing against enemies made of pure shadow. She could already see some of the creatures slipping through the outer walls, like smoke through a screen door. "Commander Steele," Kieran called down to the courtyard. "Pull your men back to the inner keep. Don't let them touch you." But it was too late. One of the shadow creatures had already reached a young guard named Tommy. The boy screamed as darkness wrapped around him like hungry snakes, draining the color from his skin and the life from his eyes. In seconds, he collapsed to the ground, nothing but an empty shell. "We have to do something," Lyra said, starting toward the stairs that led down to the courtyard. "Wait." Kieran caught her arm. "Look." He pointed toward the main gate, where the largest shadow creature was pushing through the entrance. This one was different from the others. It had the shape of a man, but it was made of swirling darkness that hurt to look at directly. When it spoke, its voice was like breaking glass. "Where is the void-touched Omega?" the creature demanded. "We know she's here. We can smell her power." Lyra's blood turned to ice water. "They're here for me." "Of course they are," said a familiar voice behind them. They turned to see the Shadow Queen materializing on the wall, her starlight form glowing against the darkness of her army. "Did you think this was about saving the kingdom, little one? This is about coming home." Kieran stepped in front of Lyra, his alpha power making the air shimmer with heat. "She's not going anywhere with you." The Shadow Queen laughed, a sound like silver bells mixed with screaming wind. "Brave little alpha. Do you really think you can protect her from her own nature?" More guards were falling in the courtyard below. Their life force flowed up toward the shadow creatures like rivers of light, making the monsters stronger with every person they touched. Commander Steele was trying to organize a retreat, but there was nowhere to run. "Stop this," Lyra said, stepping around Kieran to face the Shadow Queen. "These people didn't do anything wrong. They cast you out," the Queen replied. "They called you cursed. They locked you in a dungeon like an animal. Why do you care what happens to them?" It was a good question. Most of these people had treated her terribly. They'd whispered about her behind her back and crossed themselves when she walked by. They'd been happy to see her banished. But then she looked down and saw little Mary from the kitchens, a girl who'd always smiled at her, even when the other servants turned away. Mary was hiding behind an overturned cart, tears streaming down her face as shadow creatures circled closer. "Because it's the right thing to do," Lyra said simply. The Shadow Queen's expression darkened. "Right and wrong are human concepts. We are beyond such small thinking." She gestured toward her army. "Join us willingly, and I'll make their deaths quick. Refuse, and I'll let my children feed slowly." Lyra felt the curse inside her responding to the Queen's presence, growing stronger and hungrier. Part of her wanted to accept the offer. It would be so easy to let the darkness take control, to stop fighting what she was. But then Kieran's hand found hers, and she remembered what he'd said about mates facing the darkness together. "I have a different idea," Lyra said. Before anyone could stop her, she jumped down from the wall. She landed in the courtyard like a falling star, her curse exploding outward in waves of black energy. The shadow creatures nearest to her stopped their advance, suddenly uncertain. "You want me?" she called out to the Shadow Queen. "Come and take me." The largest shadow creature, the one that looked like a man, glided toward her with arms outstretched. "Finally," it hissed. The void-touched returns to her family. But as it reached for her, something unexpected happened. Instead of being absorbed into the creature, Lyra's curse pushed back against its darkness. Where their powers met, sparks of strange light filled the air. "Impossible," the Shadow Queen whispered from above. Lyra felt the truth hit her like lightning. The shadow creatures weren't trying to recruit her. They were trying to drain her, just like they drained everyone else. The Shadow Queen had been lying about everything. "You're not my mother," Lyra said, her voice growing stronger. "You're just another parasite that feeds on pain." The creature in front of her snarled and lunged forward. But Lyra was ready. She grabbed it with both hands, letting her curse pour into it like poison. The shadow creature began to dissolve, screaming as her power turned its own darkness against it. Around the courtyard, the other monsters hesitated. They'd never seen one of their own destroyed before. "Kill her!" the Shadow Queen shrieked from the wall. "Kill them all!" The shadow army surged forward like a breaking dam. But they'd made a mistake by hesitating, because now Kieran was there beside Lyra, his alpha strength combining with her void power in ways that made the very air crackle with energy. "Together?" he asked, taking her hand. "Together," she agreed. And as the shadow creatures closed in around them, Lyra finally understood what the curse was really for. Not to destroy, but to protect. Not to kill, but to transform death itself into something that could fight back against the darkness. The real battle was just beginning. The Shadow Queen's laughter sounded like breaking glass mixed with dying screams. "Look around you, little Omega. Your precious pack bleeds while you stand frozen like a scared rabbit." Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched Beta Marcus crawl across the blood-stained ground, black poison spreading up his arm like spilled ink. The other wolves whimpered and howled, their beautiful fur falling out in clumps where the shadow wraiths had touched them. Even the mighty Alpha King Kieran struggled to stay on his feet, silver blood trickling from deep claw marks across his chest. "This is all my fault," she whispered, her hands shaking so hard she couldn't hold them still. "I brought death everywhere I went. Now death found you because of me." The Shadow Queen floated closer, her dress made of starlight and darkness swirling around her like smoke. "Come home, cursed child. You belong with me in the void between worlds. Stop pretending you can save anyone when all you do is destroy." Lyra's knees buckled. The queen was right. She had killed flowers as a baby, turned milk sour with a touch, made her own mother cry tears of blood during her first shift. The pack had been smart to throw her out like garbage. But then she heard something that made her spine straighten. Kieran's voice, weak but steady as mountain stone. "Lyra, remember what I told you about my parents?" She turned toward him, this powerful alpha who could have chosen any omega in the kingdom. His gray eyes held no fear, even with death creeping closer every second. "Your father wasn't afraid of your mother's curse?" she said slowly, pieces clicking together in her mind like puzzle parts. "He saw past the curse to the woman underneath," Kieran replied, using his sword to pull himself upright. "Just like I see past your curse to the fierce protector you really are." The Shadow Queen hissed like an angry cat. "Pretty words won't stop the poison killing your friends, alpha fool." Lyra looked at Marcus again. The black veins had reached his shoulder now, moving toward his heart. In minutes, he would be gone forever. The same Marcus who had called her an abomination, who had tried to drag her away in blessed chains, who was dying because shadow wraiths wanted to capture her. "No," she said, surprising herself with how strong her voice sounded. "No, I won't let them die for me." She took a step toward Marcus, and the Shadow Queen shrieked, "Don't you dare touch him, and your curse will kill him faster." "Maybe," Lyra agreed, dropping to her knees beside the beta. But maybe not. She pressed her palms against the black veins spreading across his skin. The Shadow Queen was right about one thing. Lyra's touch had always brought death. But as her hands made contact with the poison, something amazing happened. Instead of making Marcus worse, her curse started drinking the shadow magic, like a thirsty plant drinking water. The black veins began shrinking back down his arm, pulled into Lyra's own body through her fingers. She gasped as foreign magic flooded her system, cold and bitter as winter wind. But Marcus's breathing got easier. His wolf gold eyes opened, clear and bright, for the first time since the attack. "Impossible," the Shadow Queen snarled. "You're supposed to spread death, not heal it." Lyra stood up, power crackling around her like invisible lightning. She finally understood what Kieran had been trying to tell her. "I don't spread death. I absorb it. I take the darkness so others can live in the light." She moved to the next injured wolf, placing her hands on wounds that bubbled with shadow poison. Again, her curse pulled the deadly magic out of their body and into her own. The wolf's tail wagged weakly as color returned to their fur. "Stop this!" The Shadow Queen's beautiful face twisted with rage. "You belong to the void. You can't save them." But Lyra was already moving to the next wolf, and the next. With each healing, she felt stronger and more complete. The curse that had made her an outcast was actually making her powerful enough to protect the pack that had rejected her. The irony tasted sweet as honey on her tongue. Kieran watched with wonder as his Omega moved through the battlefield like an avenging angel, her touch transforming poison into power. "She's not cursed," he murmured to himself. "She's chosen." The Shadow Queen realized she was losing and made one last desperate attack. Dark tentacles shot toward Lyra, aiming to drag her into the void portal that shimmered behind the queen like a window into nothing. But Lyra was ready. She caught the tentacles with her bare hands, and instead of being pulled away, she began pulling the Shadow Queen's own magic into herself. The queen's scream shattered windows in the distant palace as her power flowed into the Omega she had tried to claim. "You want me so badly?" Lyra asked, her voice echoing with new strength. "Then come and take me." The Shadow Queen lunged forward, but the moment she touched Lyra's skin, the curse that had once killed flowers began devouring the ancient evil that had threatened the kingdom for centuries. Light exploded across the battlefield as darkness met its match and lost. 3 months later, Lyra woke up before sunrise like she always did. But now it felt like a gift instead of a punishment. She slipped out of the warm bed she shared with Kieran, careful not to wake him. Even Alpha Kings needed their sleep, especially after yesterday's long council meeting about the southern border patrols. She pulled on a simple green dress and padded barefoot through the palace halls, greeting the early rising servants who no longer flinched when they saw her coming. The garden waited for her behind the great hall, morning dew sparkling like tiny diamonds on the grass. This had become her favorite place in the whole kingdom, maybe because it reminded her how much everything had changed. She knelt beside the flower bed she had planted after the Shadow Queen's defeat. These weren't ordinary roses that wilted at her touch. These midnight blooms thrived under her care, their petals dark as starlight, but somehow more beautiful than any flower that grew in sunlight. Their thorns could cut through steel, but their scent could calm a raging alpha. "Good morning, my beauties," she whispered, running her fingers along their stems. The roses pulsed with gentle magic, responding to her voice like pets greeting their favorite human. A year ago, touching these plants would have killed them in seconds. Now they grew stronger every day, just like she had. The curse was still there. She could feel it humming under her skin like a sleeping dragon. But it no longer controlled her. She controlled it. "Up early again, I see." Lyra smiled without turning around. She knew that voice better than her own heartbeat now. "The roses needed watering, and I like watching the sunrise." Kieran's arms wrapped around her waist from behind, his chin resting on top of her head. The Pack Council wants to discuss expanding the Night Garden. Apparently, other kingdoms have heard about your special flowers and want to trade for seeds. Really? Lyra leaned back against his warm chest, still amazed that someone as powerful as the Alpha King chose to hold her this gently every morning. Maybe we could help them protect their borders too. Shadow wraiths might return someday. Always thinking of others, Kieran murmured into her hair. That's why the pack loves you now. It was true. The same wolves who had once called her an abomination now brought their injured cubs to her for healing. The same Beta Marcus who had tried to exile her now served as her personal guard, claiming it was the greatest honor of his life. Children who had never seen her curse in action thought she was a magical princess from a fairy tale. But Lyra remembered the fear in their eyes during those first weeks after the battle. She remembered how they whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. Is it safe? They had asked each other. What if she loses control? The breakthrough came when little Emma, the head cook's 5-year-old daughter, fell into the lake and nearly drowned. The pack healer couldn't get the cursed water out of her lungs, water that had been poisoned by leftover shadow magic. Emma was dying, turning blue as her parents wept helplessly. Lyra had knelt beside the tiny girl and placed her hands on Emma's chest, drawing the poison out through her palms. The cursed water turned to harmless steam the moment it touched Lyra's skin. Emma coughed, gasped, and started breathing normally again. That night, Emma's parents came to Lyra's room, carrying a plate of fresh cookies and tears in their eyes. Thank you, Emma's mother had whispered. Thank you for saving our baby. Word spread quickly after that. The cursed Omega wasn't someone to fear. She was someone who faced the darkness so they didn't have to. I never thought I'd belong anywhere, Lyra admitted, watching a butterfly land on one of her midnight roses without being hurt by its magic thorns. I spent so many years believing I was broken. You were never broken, Kieran said firmly. You were just waiting for the right place to bloom. They stood together in comfortable silence as the sun climbed higher, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Lyra thought about the scared, lonely girl who had lived in the forest just a few months ago. That girl would never have believed this life was possible. A messenger wolf came running across the garden, shifting to human form as he reached them. Alpha King! Urgent news from the Eastern Territories. Kieran straightened, his protective instincts immediately alert. What kind of news? Strange reports, sir. Plants growing too fast. Animals acting odd. Magic that feels wrong. The local packs think it might be shadow magic returning, but different this time. Wilder. Lyra felt Kieran's muscles tense against her back. She knew he was already planning patrol routes and defense strategies in his head. That's what good alphas did. They prepared for threats before those threats became real problems. But for the first time since gaining her powers, Lyra felt excited instead of afraid when she heard about magical danger. We should investigate, she said, turning in Kieran's arms to meet his surprised gaze. We? He raised one eyebrow. It could be dangerous. She gestured to her garden full of midnight roses, to the palace where a pack that had once rejected her now called her family, to the kingdom that had learned to see her curse as a gift. I spent too many years hiding from danger, Kieran. Now I want to face it head on, with you beside me. His smile started slow and spread across his whole face like sunrise. In that case, my fierce Omega, let's go save another kingdom. As they walked back toward the palace to prepare for their journey, Lyra touched the mating mark on her neck. Not the traditional crescent moon, but a star being consumed by shadow and somehow shining brighter because of it. She had learned that the most beautiful things often grew from the darkest places, just like love could bloom from loneliness and strength could rise from weakness. The cursed Omega had found her place at last, not despite her darkness, but because of how she chose to use it.